My name's Sabrina Ramanov. Thanks so much for joining me on my AI podcast. I'm really excited to introduce you to Dr. Erika Wong, who's a startup founder, practicing artist, as well as a lecturer. Dr. Erika Wong, please introduce yourself. Let everybody know who you are.
Hi, my name is Erika, and I teach in both art schools and business schools. And then I also own Artists Navigate How to Get into the Art World.
That's amazing. And how does that intersect with AI? Can you talk about your background and what you're doing today?
Yeah, so predominantly I would say that I use AI for my teaching. I really wanted to go and see how I could better support my students. It really started off with this idea of thinking, I get emails at like 2, 3 in the morning from students saying like, I don't know what to do. There's a thing that I need to submit. And then you're thinking I would like to respond to you, but then also I sort of have to figure out the fact that like I can't just respond to you like 24 hours a day because I have to have some boundaries as well. Are there better ways to support students when they are very, very panicked, which is like rightly so? And I thought, even though we try really hard to have a lot of documents on wherever, they don't necessarily always read everything or like the interpretation is different. So I thought, well, what if I built a chatbot that you could just like type into and ask questions? It would be a derivative of me based on the knowledge that is specific to the course that I'm teaching. So that actually is what I started thinking about and seeing whether I could just provide that for students. What ended up actually happening is wildly different than what I had initially hoped for.
That's amazing. And I love that use case because I feel similar pain. People email me all times of the day, message me across all platforms. And it's like, how do I provide help at scale? But 60% of the time, the questions don't need my personal touch. It's like, oh, where do I find this link? And so it's really fascinating to me that you're applying this in a school setting. And I'm super curious how students are responding. Are they embracing the bot, using it all of the time at all odd hours? Like, how's it going?
So firstly, I think also because I teach across 4 universities, I'm based in Vancouver, but then I also teach in the UK and then I teach in business schools and arts. So there's a whole series of us in the business schools who are trying really hard to understand how to use AI better to support students. So it's like, this isn't like an only me kind of scenario. And in one of the universities, like we get a lot of training and then we sort of are referencing what Harvard is doing as well. So we understand like currently in business school, like Harvard's adopting this. There are mandatory courses where you have to have an AI output. And we sort of see this in RISD as well. So like this is something that we're all implementing across the board in education or in higher education. For me specifically, when I ask my students, are you using the bot? They're like, no. And I'm like, okay, I built this for you. I'm like, oh, so like you don't understand that I like built this specifically for you. Now there's like, should I use this? Like, but I don't have anyone who so openly tells me to use it. And I'm like, but you're going to use it behind my back anyway. And I would rather you use it in class when we're doing cases and when we're doing activities or analysis than for you to go home and use it in whatever way that you're using that I don't really know how you're using this. They're just like completely dumbfounded. This is not what I had anticipated whatsoever. Then it's just like, I give them prompts, which then they also don't know what to do. So then I'm like, well, how are you using this? Because, this isn't Google, right? Because if you're going to submit this as an essay, I know when I'm grading and I have an AI generated essay, but I grade it as if it's not, right? Because there are no foolproof 100%. We know this is definitely written by AI, but I know what that looks like, right? Especially when I'm looking at their citations and I'm checking the references and everything is just wrong. And I'm like, what has happened here? So then, like you're in class, you're like, okay, so use these prompts. And they're like, why? Well, you and I are not like watching the same things, And so my spectrum is very broad because I'm now watching stuff that is from pure academia and how other universities are implementing it. And then I'm watching stuff like your stuff, which is like, okay, do all these things. And like, we go through demos and all that. And I'm mashing it up when I teach. And students just don't really know what to do with this information. So I'm just like, what is happening here? Like, I'm super confused because I thought that even if you're not watching the academic stuff, you would have contact with the influencer, the content creator side.
Yeah, that's absolutely not at all what I expected. I would just kind of assume that the younger generation is much more like fluid and advanced and sophisticated with the technology, like far more than I am.
When I walk around the room and I turn around and like a lot of them are using it, and I'll say like, well, how are you prompting it? Because the thing is that what I need at the end of the term is to see that you have changed the way that you are prompting. And they're just like, oh. So when I look at the stuff and I'm just like, this isn't exactly really like that helpful for output for you to like really understand the topics that we're going through. It's very interesting to watch how people are and also aren't using it and like the behaviors that they have towards what they think AI is. And then of course, like there's the major concern that I consistently have, which is accuracy. And students can't really tell whether what has been generated is actually accurate. So now I'm like super concerned, right? Because they're submitting things that I'm just like, this doesn't seem correct. So, like how do you actually course correct when they're not producing information and is not reflecting on the academic standards that just needs to exist when you are in like an MBA program, for example.
As you're navigating all this, do you get a lot of support from your institution in terms of like, here are frameworks you should use, here are different things you should try, or is it more of like a bottoms up approach where you try different things and then share it with your colleagues and try to figure out what works?
I think it's a little bit of both because I come from a fine art background. I'm just really open to experimentation. And when things don't work out, I'm just like, okay, well, that didn't work. But then sort of the students aren't necessarily that forgiving when things don't work because they're just like, what are you doing? And I'm just like trying things out. You're supposed to know exactly, like it's very definite when you're teaching. So everything is sort of like set in stone. But then when you're integrating a new type of technology, the forgiveness is much lower, because they expect you to know. And I'm just sort of there to be like, but I'm testing this with you as you're trying to learn what this looks like as well. And they're just like, no, thank
They're
you.
just like, no.
When you get the response that's like, no, then you sort of sit there and go, like, mental note, like, write this to someone else and be like, yeah, that failed. So, like, what do we do now to, like, course correct in terms of people who have taught for a longer period of time but haven't necessarily used technology or AI to this component. So you ask them, like, what do you do in real time now? Like, how do I fix some of these things? And they're like, oh, you just do like XYZ instead. And you're like, oh, okay. It's a blended approach in terms of what can exist. And I can give you a really good example. So in the art school that I teach intro to business for creatives and financial practices for creatives. And the AI component of it has been resistant at the very beginning. It was basically like, no, thank you. Why would you want that? Okay. So I was like, because I think it's a really good tool for brainstorming because creatives, we haven't been taught business. So there are a lot of really large frameworks to onboard to see how to think about this and set up your own business and think through business, etc. Especially if you're thinking about like revenue stream, which you have never had to think about before. It's nice to have a partner to brainstorm with you that's beyond like your friend, just scraping data for you to make you suggestions. And the resistance was like legit real on the first class. It was just like, no.
And just to clarify for the audience, is that resistance due to AI and how it's perceived in the creative arts community?
100%. I think that when we hear AI, we generally, or like for myself, I always assume it's like image creation or anything like creative generated, which has a completely different connotation than using a bot to help with brainstorming, for example. And I recently had written to an artist that I had helped. And I was like, oh, so what are your thoughts on AI? And he was like, nothing. Yeah, that's like that. We cannot have that conversation. And I was like, okay. But what if I said that I built you a bot, like, for artists to use? And he's like, oh, that's a different thing altogether. A bot, like, I'm fine with. And I was like, okay. So it's interesting, like that connotation, I think, for any image generation or anything that touches on creativity, we safeguard what we are trained in. Even for me, I think about it very, very differently. Having a bot that can help you brainstorm versus using something like a Midjourney is very different. And it might be because I don't use image generation like at all. And I've tried it in the past. And I find that having text prompt to generate an image is not nearly the same thing as what I see inside my brain. My example of like the resistance is, so in the art school, I teach like a very broad range of creatives. And one of the questions I had been asked was, what is the difference between Claude and ChatGPT? And I like couldn't get across the difference between, I'm showing you this Claude prompt because I can create, or somebody has created a prompt to help you generate a prompt, which we're following step by step in order for you to write this into the bot that I've created for the course. And they couldn't decipher the two differences. Like they just think that it's like one thing altogether. The student was trying really hard to get prompt that was created in Claude into ChatGPT, but like literally taking verbatim what was inside Claude and plugging it into ChatGPT, and was like, that doesn't work. And I just find that I don't really have the language to go and explain further than it's like, it's two different companies that are doing similar things, and I'm giving you a prompt to help you generate some output that is quite specific as to what we're doing here, which is analyzing your business model canvas. But you can sort of see like the confusion is very similar between art school and business school. But the difference is that in the business school, they use it, but they use it in a context of, I'm going to use this to help me write an essay. And then in the art school is, I don't really know what's happening, but I think that we're going to image generate. And it's like, neither.
So are you a fan of teaching kids younger how to use AI so that they're prepared for the possibilities and different use cases for it? Because it's fascinating to me. I would have just assumed the total opposite, where college kids especially, or even higher ed, would be much more experimental. Certainly more than like a busy professor who just needs to get the answer right now. I'm just really interested in how you think, or how you plan to change your own education and curriculum to adapt for teaching more of the fundamentals, almost, of like, what is AI? What are all the different ways you can interact with it, the different types of things you can do with it?
So I think something that quite a few of my colleagues and I have been thinking about is, how do you make knowledge more accessible? And we sort of see this across the board in terms of textbook purchases. Textbooks are notoriously expensive. And so what ends up happening is a lot of students don't buy them. Then that creates a different problem altogether, because now you're sort of waiting for me to give you the information when I lecture you. But then the problem is that there's so much content that you're supposed to read through prep when you come into class, but you're not doing any of that. And a portion of it is then, if there's this gap between how much it costs for you to buy the textbook and you not doing it and waiting for me to give the information to you, then how can we as educators actually support students understanding that, yes, if you have multiple courses, and yes, if textbooks are all like $100, $200, like that is a lot of money that you're just paying up front. So, they're like, for one of the course bots I've created for my strategic management class, it's like, well, what if we use an open source textbook, and wow, you're able to use that as a knowledge base to test to see what that is. Is it the course textbook? No. But is it a textbook that we also use within the university that we understand is open source and that it has very similar information, which is sort of like the nice thing about business schools, is the answer is yes. So, like that's another way that we're thinking, was like, can I actually guide student and student learning where there isn't a textbook, so to speak, but the knowledge base is on the back end where you can have integration and students can actually ask questions. So some of the concerns that we run into is then criticality. How do you foster critical thinking when it becomes this kind of Q&A scenario? Because you're going to lose steam, right? Because I don't want to keep asking you questions. At some point, I just want you to give me an answer. Like that's what happens in a classroom. But these are things that like we're definitely thinking about. And I have to say that when I watch your voice flow video, that was one of the things that I thought about. And I was like, oh, what if we like did it like that? Because it gives me more control control over knowledge base, which is very important for accuracy purposes, that it's not hallucinating. Because I consume so much of your content, it like has given me a lot of ideas of how to take the products that are available and then adapt it for education purposes, to like give resources to my students or artists that I'm working with.
That is honestly an amazing application that I've never thought about and never heard anyone talk about. Like open source textbooks as your knowledge base for chatbots to support students. And yeah, I mean, especially with the price of textbooks, I mean, easily 100. I would buy used textbooks, from previous students and everything. I just had no idea it was a problem that like students are not even buying textbooks. That's such a cool startup idea, actually, honestly. I love that. So is that something you're planning to pursue with colleagues or?
I've not thought about that. I think I need a little bit more expertise on like how I could do that. Like the other things that I've thought about more so would be like prompt engineering and helping students how to think to build out these so-called personas, helping them sort of like what Google does with their interview, which I can't remember what it's called. So, like they have these like personas and then you can like ask them interview questions. I was thinking more along the lines of like doing prompt engineering, just because it's helpful to be able to think on that level. And I've certainly also gone through how you prompt. And I think it's really funny. Like sometimes when I go through your database and it like, you're like, tell the bot to be like, take a deep breath. Is it for me or is it for like the bot actually to go and scan? I was like, I don't know. I think it's for me.
The prompt is so long at this point. Like take a deep breath if you're still reading it. Yeah, one of my favorite prompt engineering tools is Anthropic Prompt Generator. I don't know if you've played with that yet, but yeah, you can put in a very, very simple prompt, like create a business plan, and it spits out this huge prompt with things like, here's your scratch pad. First, you're going to brainstorm, think of the ideas, think about the relationship between concepts and how they're interconnected. And then you're going to do step by step, here's your final output using the notes from your brainstorming scratch pad. I learned a lot just through using that tool of different ways that you can structure prompts, XML tags, if you are referencing variables. A lot of the prompt engineering resources that I've come across tend to skew heavily technical, and they'll use technical terms like few shot prompting, which means just give it a few examples. So just being able to translate those really technical prompt engineering concepts into just normal speak, give it a few examples, use bullet points to be like step 1, step 2, step 3. Even today I spend hours working on a single prompt because I know if I can get it to what I like, I can use it again and again and again, and it saves me so much time in the future. So it's still one of my highest ROI activities. And that's even though I've written lots of prompts already. I still spend like several hours to craft a really high quality prompt that I can reuse for my use cases.
I think that's something that, for sure, like I've never really thought about. Like it would take hours and hours to go and have a very good prompt. I write my prompts and I'm also like very demanding with my ChatGPT. I was like, no, you're doing this wrong. This is what I asked for. So now I've like learned from your prompts to be like, just ask me a lot of questions until you actually get what it is that I'm trying to do.
That's my favorite prompt hack for sure.
Just keep asking me questions until like we generate exactly what it is that you think that I'm looking for. And then sometimes it's like, oh, I didn't know that I was looking for that. But you're like, no, right, I can work with this. Like this is fine. But I do think that prompt engineering is really useful in terms of like even seeing a scenario from multiple lenses, just being empathetic. So when you're analyzing something, it's just like, okay, give me this prompt and like give me a whole bunch of different perspectives as to like why this is a problem for like different people. And like for learning, that's so good to use like very kind of like business school jargon. It's like the stakeholders, like, well, you need to give me more than just like the business and the consumers and like I need more than that, right? So then it's like, it's really nice when students don't really know what it is that you're looking for. And then on like the flip side for artists, like, it's not just artists. Now tell me what that could look like for your suppliers and your curators and your dealers and your collectors. And so all of a sudden, you're building out this almost like a simulation for them to get a much wholer picture, to understand holistically what it would look like when you're trying to understand a situation and how to navigate the next steps, which is something like I really appreciate, that it can produce information quite quickly for you. Prompt engineering is really nice because it puts you in that mind frame to be like, I need you to do this thing for me, and then I need all these outputs. Now let's see how we proceed after that.
With that example, one that came to mind is I have a married couple friend, and they each use ChatGPT to like break down any arguments that they have. They'd be like, "This is my perspective. This is what she said. Can you explain to me like where she's coming from and like why we're not like on the same page?" And I found that such an interesting use case. In the business world, you can map it to stakeholders, conflict resolution. In your team, you have diverse perspectives. You can't always assume you know what people are thinking about or where they're coming from, the data that they have in their mind and the perspective they're coming from. And so I found it like such an interesting use case as well of AI to kind of help you understand other people's perspectives, which is so weird to say because we're using AI, not a person, to help you understand all of these different human perspectives.
Actually, one thing that I find also very interesting about AI, so I'm neurodivergent, and I was actually told by one of our trainers at the university that if you tell AI to read tone, like, I don't know what this is trying to say to me. Can you tell me like what this tone is? Because I don't know what is actionable or like what is required of me. And apparently ChatGPT does a really, really good job of it, like explaining to you what is happening. So for me, the way that I actually ask ChatGPT, it's like you have to list things out in a way that is very, very digestible for neurodivergent learners. You will always ask them questions to clarify to see whether they understand things or not, because just like dyslexic learners or ADHD learners have a very different way of understanding information, right? And so from that point of view, it's really useful to get like AI to go and do these things, because you could just say to it, it's like, I don't know what you're saying to me. I need you to explicitly say like why these two things make sense.
You can be that forward and direct without any consequences. You can't be that way necessarily all the time in like real world settings, you know?
You
Like,
can. I mean, I've said it like many years in my life. I'm just like, I don't know what to do with this information. And then people are just like, what's happening here? And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. And so, you know, when people realize like, oh, wait, she just doesn't understand information the same way, then they like will explain it to you in a different capacity. But, you know, until people sort of like know how you understand information, like they don't know what to do. Cause like that statement of like, I don't know what to do with this information is kind of jarring. In academia, like that's okay because people are trying to go and help you and give you that support. But then like if you don't even know that you need extra support to understand information, I think again, like AI is a really, really good tool to help you, because now you can just say, I don't get it. And you can say it like infinitely.
Infinite patience, 24/7. That's probably one of the most exciting use cases for AI is just that personalized learning component. Like ask anything you want, take as much time as you want. You don't have to be embarrassed if you don't know something or you ask a question 20 times. You're not holding up a class or you're not looking dumb or anything. It's not going to tell anyone. It's not going to judge you for that unless you explicitly ask to be roasted, which is what I did this morning. But like it's infinitely patient. It's 24/7 and it has a massive knowledge base to tap into. And especially for like learning new concepts, like getting summaries really quickly tailored to your style. Like for me, I'm actually not very visual at all. It's really hard for me to learn visually. I learn through like reading and writing. So I would rather have like 10 pages of text than a diagram, which is super weird. I know, I know, but that's just my learning style in terms of how I process knowledge. And so I'll just have ChatGPT explain to me a concept in a 2,000 word essay. So it covers like all the details, all the puts, and I enjoy it. It's super weird, I know, but that's how I learn it. Now ChatGPT knows through its memory to teach me about something. It knows to spit out 2,000 words. It's one of the use cases of AI I'm just super excited about, like personalized, democratized learning at scale.
100%. That still sounds like my worst nightmare, to give me like 2,000 words. My team is like, Erika, you need to read this here. I need you to say you have read this, because I stop reading, you know, like, cause your brain gets so tired from all the information and it's like, oh, it stopped. And it's like, I know you stopped. So like, I need you to confirm that you've actually read this now. And it's like, okay, I read this. Yeah. But it's like, wow, I cannot imagine doing that. Like, but I do think that visual audio for me, like I do these like very bad drawings for my students in like boxes and arrows and be like, this is the feedback loop that you're trying to achieve here. This is the system and like why this is happening and like the analysis, like, and they're like, I don't know, this is the response I get a lot, which is like this like nodding of like, I'm like, does this make sense? And they're like, nodding really hard, and I'm like, oh, I really hope that it does make sense. But again, like I think ChatGPT or like AI is really helpful because like if that's not your learning method, then you don't have to be forced to understand because that's the way that I can explain things to you. And I'm limited, I'm just a human being that I can only explain things based on how I can understand something. And if that doesn't work with you, then like we should be able to find different ways to help you as well, right? If not, then like you shouldn't have to suffer in silence.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh. Let's switch gears a bit. So I wanted to talk about your startup because you're a startup founder as well as a practicing artist and lecturer. So could you share a little bit about your startup? What's it do? How far along are you guys?
Yeah, so I, as a trained artist, really recognize that it's really hard to get into the art world. And so I guess like for me, it's like I couldn't quite figure out why it was so hard to get into the art world. We just like know that it's very difficult. Why? What are the barriers for entry for an artist to get into the industry? And then so that was like the main overarching question to ask that. And then I saw that there were a lot of other things that sort of like went into it as well. It's like, why is it that other businesses have a tendency to use the creative arts as a method to talk about helping with engagement? And I was like, but if that's true, like, why is it so hard for us to get into the industry? Like, what are the problems there? And so like my business is very much about that, is to go and help artists navigate getting into what we call the primary market. So if anyone's familiar with like the business world or like banking systems, we use very similar terminology, which is the primary market is the gallery system. Why is it that we almost never get in? And that's what I really explore, and that is what my Practice Playbook does. We actually help artists build out a playbook, which is 12-month playbook that you get to figure out when you spend a lot of money, when you actually do a lot of research, when are you producing, like what does that look like on a back end, and then understanding the expectations and standards that the industry places on artists in order for you to be able to position yourself and get into the industry.
Okay, so it's called mypracticeplaybook.com. And who is the ideal audience? Is it someone who's currently studying art or has already graduated?
Ideally, it would be somebody who has gone into the industry for a little bit and like have found that there's a gap between their application of getting into the industry and then what are the expectations and standards. And because like I think again, mostly in art school, we're fed this one narrative and one narrative only, which is you get into the art world, you get represented. That is the ultimate success, and you're going to be represented by some sort of a blue chip at some point at the end, which is the blue chip is like the best of the best. And there are only 4 of them, and it's very difficult, right? Like, so some of like the really big counterintuitive points that we know similar to business school is, and this is data that like I collected, or like the research that has been done on this like quite a while back now, there are only 10 art schools in the world that gets let into the industry.
Oh,
Yale
wow.
gets 50% of the market, and then the rest of the 9 has to share the 50%. Okay. So I think people may not actually realize how competitive to get into the art world as artists, because some of the data, like when you read them, again, like this is, I can't remember what it was. It might be ArtNet, the intelligence report in 2017 or 2018. But basically like the odds are stacked against you. And because excellence is just bare minimum to get into the industry, so now you're competing in a really small pool with people who are excellent at what they do. And then there's like a whole series of other things as well. So if that's the case and we are assigned legitimacy and value, what happens to artists who don't quite understand that legitimacy and valuation system? I did a lot of research on that to understand how artists can find different strategies to navigate and self-advocate to get into the industry. So that's again like what my business really does, is for you to go and self-protect and self-advocate, like learning some of the business tools, like how do you budget properly? Do you understand legal jargon? Are you actually doing inventory in a way that's helpful for you? What about your mental health? Are we recognizing that rejection is 99% of our job description? And so if that's the case, then are we actually paying attention to how we hold stress in our body, and like what does that do to our mental health, and how that impacts your practice, and then therefore being able to supplement monetary wise, like how is that actually happening?
Yeah, it sounds like a very holistic solution for artists who are, in the industry really trying to break through. So it's not just how to monetize, but more broadly, how to understand the whole ecosystem, navigate it while taking care of yourself, self-advocating, being resilient through lots of rejections, which it sounds like is the norm. Do you use or incorporate any AI as part of that product?
I also have written a bot for it based on my knowledge of just like the last decade, so like of the information that I have. So that's actually how I've integrated that as well. I recently spoke with an artist who was using, or she was at the tail end of producing her own playbook, and she was like, oh, like it was really useful when I'm trying to go and write an artist statement. Like it's not perfect and it's an ongoing process, but it's so helpful to go and have your method of how to explain an artist statement in like a really concise way to help me start. So like that's what I use AI for a lot. It helps you understand where the limitations and boundaries of like, come back, this is where we need to be. Like, come back, too far, too far. This isn't what they're looking for. And then it's helpful to know when, oh, okay, wait, I didn't know that like I deviated too far from the path of like what is accepted in the industry. So now like let's go back and use like much simpler wording to get my points across.
Yeah, because if you don't know what good is or what's expected or what's the standard, if there isn't much information about that that's easily accessible, then you just don't know. So it sounds like the chatbot is kind of a helpful assistant for some of these tasks that maybe they don't want to focus on all the time. Like it's not your main creative work. It's kind of the I don't know what to call it, the drudgery, like the stuff you just kind of have to do in order to break through and continue to grow your career.
Exactly. The admin side of things, the not glamorous, but the things that like really sets the foundation in order for you to sit there and make work in your studio. So yeah, I really hope that it is really helpful. Like that's the point. Like I think about, I wish I had something like this when I went to art school. Like I wish somebody had explained all these things to me so I didn't have to like run into the wall over and over again, being like really upset because like I don't know why I was really upset. I just knew that I was upset all the time. Like, why wouldn't you just let me into the industry? And so having resources like this and having very clear explanations as to, well, it's like this. And the explanations that I usually have are like, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like this because it's caused by this. And so therefore, when you do something like this, then like the impact is like this, which is, I suppose, like very like business school explanation. But a lot of the artists that I work with understand that on a much easier capacity, because then it's not you. Like you're not
It's nothing
feeling you're being
personal.
attacked, or yeah, exactly, which is really nice. So yeah, again, I use AI for those purposes.
And what are some of the reactions you've gotten from clients or users or customers who've gone through the playbook, used the chatbot? What have they kind of learned their biggest takeaway from the process?
The takeaways usually are, I've never thought about it like that before. Oh, I didn't realize that I'm more productive in certain times. And I'm like, yeah, probably not. And then like one of the big things that I say, it's like, well, how are you spending money? Are we tracking money in a way that you actually know? Do you have a separate bank account? Like I cannot stress enough that you have to have a separate bank account, guys. Like, because that is really important when you file your taxes. So and I think some of the things that get asked quite often are like, how do I price? I teach pricing based on how we teach pricing in business school. And again, like that's loaded into the bot to go and help you figure out something like that. Something I'm actually thinking about now, which is the next step, is, how you did that video with voice flow with Abdullah,
Abdullah.
where he did a quote. And I was like, wouldn't that be so amazing to have something integrated where, again, the learning is you need to figure out what your prices are and you need to decide what that looks like after you've gone through the process of knowing what your break-even analysis is and like XYZ, XYZ. But then you would be able to go and make a quote Like that would be amazing for artists to have a tool like that and just like not have to think about it again, you know? And it's like, how do we streamline process to help artists so they can get into the studio, make more often and have AI do things for them where they don't even have to worry about it or like look at it once a month to see whether things are on track or not, rather than just being overwhelmed to the back of their heads thinking, oh my, I don't want to do this.
Reminds me of
I
that
don't want to.
viral tweet or quote or whatever. You want AI to do the dishes and laundry and all that admin stuff so you can focus on the fun part, which is creating and freeing up as much time as possible. And even though I'm not into fine arts, just as a content creator, I feel a lot of the same pain points where it's like I need to automate as much as possible with AI so I can focus on making really awesome YouTube tutorials and AI education because that's what I enjoy. It's very fulfilling for me and rewarding and really fun and enjoyable for me. And I want to preserve as much time for that as possible using AI to automate the rest. So yeah, I'm kind of coming from it from that perspective too. And it's really cool to hear that AI can be used to help artists as well. And so just to wrap up here, like where can folks find out more about My Practice Playbook?
You can find us online at mypracticeplaybook.com. I also have Instagram. We also exist on TikTok. So that is also My Practice Playbook is the handle. I also have two podcasts. So one is Hide or Practice, where we really talk about the inner workings of the fine art world. And then I have one that's called FAQ, so frequent arts questions. So if you're trying to get into the industry about the arts, we explain to you what that looks like who do you talk to? What are these jobs actually supposed to be? So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for joining.